So yeah, as Paul said, the session is recorded, so be mindful of what you say. It will come on YouTube at some point on the Cgars YouTube channel. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, yeah, also from our side, an apology for the delays on this limited edition. As most of you will be aware, the first batch got stolen. You know, the hype of the cigar release, I guess, caused somebody to be an opportunist and take their chances. So that was the first delay, and then the second delay was mainly transport and Brexit paperwork, etc., etc. So we had to unfortunately delay this session a few times, but here we are. So thank you to Naomi, who's joining us from the US, and Sam, our global brand ambassador for Davidoff, who's based in Basel. So I guess, Naomi, if you can do a quick introduction of yourself for us, and then Sam, you afterwards.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'm the Balvenie ambassador for the east half of the US. So my lovely colleague, Alwyn, passed this one over to me. She knew that I'm a huge cigar fan, and I'm really thrilled to be able to chat through all these whiskeys with you all. Some of my favorites ever to go with cigars are these three whiskeys, and each do a little bit of something different with a cigar. So I think it's going to be a really cool pairing situation as we move through. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. Sam, on to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Naomi. Good to know that you like cigars. I mean, that's just as perfect. Yeah. So yeah, as Roy mentioned, global brand ambassador for the brand Davidoff, but on top also head of product innovation. When it comes to new blends, I'm very much in contact with our factories in Honduras and Dominican Republic. And yeah, so basically, that's why you can ask me a lot of questions about tobacco or whatever you want to know about cigars. I know that Roy has prepared already some questions which he never shares with me before, so it's always a surprise for me as well. So please feel free to ask any question. Hope you enjoy the session with the cigar, with the nice Balvenie whiskey. I have, by the way, the week of Pete, 14 years old, so I'm going to be very curious how it goes with the cigar. And I hope you're all set and we can start to enjoy.
Perfect. We just got Mitchell joining now.
Oh, he's got it?
Yeah, he's got it. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Perfect. So yeah, the Winston Churchill limited edition. First, I think we start with Naomi actually, because we've got three whiskeys. So if we start with the first whiskey, I guess we'll start with the 12-year-old double wood.
Yeah, sounds lovely.
Yeah.
So
yeah, if you could explain a little bit more about the whiskey before we go into the first part of the cigar.
Sure, sounds great. So yeah, so the Doublewood 12 is really kind of the heart and soul of our company here. So Balvenie, we're owned by William Grant and Sons, and we're now on the 6th generation of Grants that are running the company. So we're one of the only scotches out there, really us and Glenfarclas, that are still owned by the founding families of the 1800s. So it's really an honor to work for them. And the Balvenie is kind of, you know, kind of the heart and soul of the William Grant and Sons portfolio. That and Glenfiddich are the two that William Grant, the man himself, started in the 1800s. So there's a lot of history here. And as I said, some of my absolute favorites with the cigar as well. One, they're really full-bodied, very rich, very honey-forward, which of course is going to be important with a cigar. As all of you know, if you like a medium to full-bodied and you have too light of a whiskey, it can kind of disappear. So it's great that we have these really rich, kind of hefty single malts here to drink alongside. So our Doublewood 12 is aged for 12 full years in ex-bourbon barrels, American oak casks. So from that, you're going to get that vanilla, that honey, a lot of the flavors you'd kind of associate with a bourbon, except a bit more, as I said, kind of full-bodied and rich. And then it gets finished for an extra couple months in European oak ex-sherry casks, which one gives it this beautiful reddish hue, that European oak, and also adds a really nutty, kind of savory, spice-forward side to things. So all those flavors coming together is really a lovely combination. It's very nuanced and very complex, and really nice to drink with a cigar for a billion reasons. I've already listed some. But another that I just always love to highlight is we're very old school. We're very handmade still, handcrafted. We still grow and malt our own barley on site. We have a cooperage that's all ours on site where we build and repair barrels. We still hand make our copper pot stills. Like, we still have all these incredible traditional practices that go into our whiskey, which one, just makes it taste delicious, but two, it's because we really value something that's actually handmade, especially in a world where, kind of handcrafted, handmade products. Those words can be a little bit kind of abused and misused and overused. So it's really important to us to find other products and things that also value those. And so that's why it's always a treat to do Balvenie with really premium cigars, because premium cigars is kind of one of the other categories in the world that also values that tradition and those really old school practices. So so enjoy this Doublewood 12, and I'm going to enjoy it along with you guys. So cheers, Slanjava.
Perfect. I did a little bit of research, and as you mentioned, it was aged for 12 years in the American oak, and then 9 months in ex-Oloroso sherry cask, and then you put them in tons for 3 to 4 months. What's the purpose of that?
Yeah, so the tons, they're called marrying tons, and they're these enormous oak vessels that the oak has been used many, many times. So it's not meant to impart flavor at that stage. It's just meant to blend the whiskey together before we actually release it as these bottlings. So that's what kind of the difference is between one of these, our core range, and a single barrel. These ones are going to be multiple of our barrels coming together so that, if you buy another bottle of Doublewood 12 a couple months from now, it should taste the same as this one, versus a single barrel where it's one single cask. So that's kind of the difference there, is you're going to marry those casks together, which is different, by the way, than a blended whiskey, something like, like Johnny Walker or something, where you're purchasing whiskey from other people and then blending it together. This we refer to as marrying because it's all our own whiskey that we made. So it's not, it's a little bit confusing there. So it's still a single malt, but it's essentially marrying our own cask together for consistency.
Perfect, thank you. And what kind of flavors can people expect from the whiskey?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, the nose, I'm sure if, some of you sent the same things as me, it's going to be a lot of vanilla right off the bat. And that too, if you leave it in your glass for a bit, you'll see that really opens up into almost like vanilla bean icing. And so the nose is going to have a lot of that kind of sweetness. And then on the palate, usually for me, I get a much more of that rich, savory side that comes from the European oak. Like I said, kind of almost like almonds, nuttiness, walnut, and a little bit of kind of stone fruit comes from that European oak as well. So really, really lovely there. And I'd love to hear too, as we go, what people think of these. Please feel free to put your thoughts and questions and all that in the chat. Because you can remember everyone's palates are different. So I can say, same thing with a cigar. I can say what I, taste and smell, but everyone is different. So you can agree with me on everything, some of it, none of it, doesn't matter. Just enjoy and, let me know what you guys think of it.
Perfect, thank you. Sam, over to you. So the Winston Churchill Limited Edition 21. So what can you tell us about firsting the cigar and what people should expect from the first third?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you're all lucky that you can still enjoy the cigar. As I mentioned, it's unfortunately sold out globally. So we are in the world of Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill has been a person with many characters, with many facets. One of the character was that he was a commander. So he was commanding on the battlefield. He was thinking a lot about the strategy. And so basically this character represented in a nice Toro format. As you see, it's a lovely 52 by 6. So why a Toro format? Because the Toro format gives you also a certain strength to the cigar. You have with a 52 ring gauge, you have a kind of let's say playground where you can play with different tobaccos. And here really is the idea behind creating a limited edition. It's always for us something very special when it comes to Winston Churchill. Why? Because people are expecting a lot. And what we try to do is take some elements from our Winston Churchill line, let's say the white with the white ring, and some of the late hour lines. So basically we try to combine those flavors, sometimes also tobaccos, to give you also a different kind of stimulation than the normal lines. But for you, if this one is sold out, and that was interesting, we had a lot of discussions with other markets, whereas, as Naomi said, every palette is a bit different. Some thought, okay, the limited edition, the Commander 2021 is a bit spicy, a bit intensive, so maybe this person should go on the Winston Churchill, on the normal line. If you do think that, wow, you love this complexity, you love these flavors, then I recommend to try the late hour if you haven't yet tried it. So for me, at the beginning, at the third, you have this nice earthiness, you have some spices, some nuts, some dried fruits. I think already at the beginning, the cigar is quite interesting because you see that, okay, there is a kind of strength level. We gave it a 3.5 out of 5, but nevertheless, the aromas are very much easy to filter out, which I think, what I personally always love in a cigar, when you can really taste the flavors that the cigar has. Yes, so that was a bit the idea behind. Also in terms of strategy, I don't know if when you pass our stores, you sometimes see the retail poster with a chessboard on it. We combine it with chess because of the chess. You have to think strategically. You have to think some kind of move in front of you. And also, what we have also discovered a lot in cigar lounges, they're often chessboards, and the cigar lover enjoys to play chess and then enjoy his cigar while playing. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the history of the Winston Churchill line? Because it was kind of relaunched in 2014. It existed beforehand. So what's the story about the relaunch?
So basically, the Churchill, let's say, family approached us in 2005, mainly to they came to see us and say, look, we want to do a cigar line to honor our Sir Winston Churchill, and they approached us, and we have been in Basel at this time, of course, very honored and glad to develop a line of cigars for them, which we did and launched in 2007, 2008, depending on which market. And basically, those have been the cigar lines that some of you maybe remember. The Marrakesh, we had the Blend Time, we had the number 10, basically linked also to the history of Winston Churchill. That has been the only brand, a part of Davidoff, that has been rolled in our, let's say, main Davidoff factory. If you have been visiting us in Dominican Republic, you see that the main building is reserved for Davidoff, and then on the right, it's OK Cigars for Griffin, Sino Platinum, Arvo. And that one was with pride that we rolled it in our own factory. And then basically, Roy, what you were touching on was the relaunch. So basically, Randolph Churchill, the great grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, approached us again and said, "Look, can we do something different? Maybe, you know, we wanna get more impact on the cigars." And that's why we then decided to redesign the ring. So now you have the nice silhouette of Sir Winston Churchill on the ring. So we put him as a person more prominent. We linked the cigar more to his characters. And that was basically, for me, the background information I needed to do the blending. So we were concentrating on how to represent each character in the cigar. And that's why we chose 4 different origin tobaccos in there. So you have Dominican Republic, you have Dominican Republic and Nicaragua in the filler, you have a Mexican binder and an Ecuadorian wrapper. And each tobacco mainly represents a character of Sir Winston Churchill, be it a bit stronger, be it a little bit milder, but altogether very balanced blend that is not too strong, but very flavorful. And I think that's exactly what the cigar aficionado is looking for in a cigar. And after the reblending of the plastic line, we then started with the late hour to ferment some tobacco in a whiskey cask. We got whiskey casks from the Speyside region, where we ferment the tobacco in there for 5 months, and giving this kind of added note, complexity to the late hour cigar line.
What about this cigar? What's the blend for this cigar?
So this blend, maybe if I can show you,
Of course, yeah.
it might be a bit easier for you than to see. So here we go. So you see that mainly the blend, so again, we focus on different origins. So here in the filler, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different tobaccos from the Dominican Republic. And you see also the grade, we're talking here Piloto Ligero, We have a nice hybrid 2020. So hybrids we develop ourselves, so our own seeds. It's in a Secco level, mainly a bit to give a certain balance to the blend. San Vicente Mejorado, Ligero, and San Vicente Viso. So the difference between those two is that the San Vicente is basically another hybrid of the original San Vicente, giving you a little bit more complexity to the blend. And those four Dominican tobaccos have been, let's say, a little bit spiced up by the Esteli Visos from Nicaragua. Then we have, in this case, a Dominican binder, so not like the other lines, a Mexican binder, but a Dominican a binder and hybrid 257 from Yamasa in a Secco grade, perfect for the combustion, and we have a lovely Ecuadorian wrapper. So you see, there is, yes, we have different origins. There is no tobacco that has been fermented in whiskey cask, but with this mix of tobaccos, and if you analyze a little bit the flavors, you get to the typical flavors a bit from the Winston Churchill Classic line and the late hour. So it's a nice combination, a bit different, but also underlining this limited edition by also this tobacco we have only available in limited quantities, and therefore we have produced of this limited edition 11,100 boxes globally, and you in the UK, you're the lucky ones to still enjoy them.
Can you explain a little bit more about Visus tobacco? Because Visus tobacco is not really a term which is that well known in the cigar world, because only something really Davidoff uses. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Mm-hmm. So Visus is basically, it's a grade of the plant. So you have to imagine, if you look at the plant, let's say average is 1 meter 70, 1 meter 80 in height. So if you start at the bottom of the plant, it's called the Volado grade. Then you go up to the Secco grade, and then comes Visus, and then comes Ligero. What we really emphasize on, or we pay a lot of attention to, is mainly do the separation or the sorting by these grades. Because you can say, okay, let's say the middle part you can classify as Visus, but in the middle part where your Visus is, it can also be a little bit of Secco and also a little bit of Ligero. So what we do is really we classify the leaves really according to their grade, which helps us also to be precise in our blending, and also in terms of consistency. We exactly know how to replicate, how to do a blend again based on this nice sorting and based on this crucial attention to detail when it comes to different grades of the plant. So basically, when you look at the plant, Volado at the bottom it's very mild tobacco, it's kind of earthiness, and then basically you go up with strength. And Ligero is always the strongest tobacco from the plant. Why? Because the plant is always growing, so all the strength goes on top of the plant, and it's also more exposed to the sunshine, so it's developing a little bit more of these flavors, also the thickness of the leaves, and yeah. So that's why we always. So if you look at the blend, we're very transparent, I think, and we get a lot of comments that our lovely consumers, they really enjoy it, because I think being transparent like this, you basically also develop your own palate. You can look at the different tobaccos, you can feel them, we can sense them out, and I think it helps also developing the palate for the future.
And you just mentioned hybrids as well. So how do the agronomists create a hybrid? So how they, this one is hybrid 257, hybrid 2020. So how do they come to life?
So when we do the hybrid, so basically it's a crossing of two different plants. You can call it the mother plant and the father plant. We do the crossing, so basically we take the seed, we plant them always with the mother plant, because the male is sterile, and then basically you get a new kind of plant. It's called in easy language, and it takes up to 7 years until this new seed is pure. And this is important, that we get a purity in the seeds, and therefore a new plant, basically. We call this then a new hybrid, like the 2020, like the hybrid 257. And the names are sometimes given by the how many times you try to get this hybrid. So you see there's a lot of experiments until you get a new hybrid. And also being the 7 years, so of course we have them in parallel. We have this called the secret garden. Roy, I don't know if you know where the secret garden is. Oh, you do know? Okay, good. So in this secret garden, we then plant different hybrids. We always try to see how is the plant growing. Is it getting maybe too thin, or the leaves are getting too thin? Then it's not good. We need to try again. And this really takes a lot of years. And then we're always very excited if we have a new hybrid that we can then taste in a cigar. What we then do normally is smoke this hybrid in 100% to really get the taste of this new tobacco, and then to see how this tobacco can mainly harmonize with different other tobaccos than in a blend.
Perfect. We'll go back to Naomi for a second. So Naomi, what are your first thoughts on the cigar and the pairing with the Balvenie Doublewood?
Oh, I mean, gorgeous pairing. And I also love that graphic of the cigar. Not only is it super informative, but it's beautiful. It almost looks like a luxury car ad, the way it's set up. It's gorgeous. So that was really fun when you sent that to me. I hadn't really seen a cigar kind of
broken
like
down.
Yeah. Really beautiful, yeah. And I was saying, to Roy before I started this, I recently completed kind of a cigar education course here in the U.S. So I've always enjoyed cigars for many years, but it was more just I knew I enjoyed them broadly. And it's been very recent that I kind of have dug a lot deeper into that education. So it's so great to listen to you, Sam, now that I actually know what, more of these things mean and all of that. So it's really such a treat. So yeah, I think to me, as soon as this sits out a bit longer, as I said, I'm already getting more vanilla on the nose and a bit more of that, a little bit more almost like that decadent dessert side, which I think is kind of a nice balance with the cigar. I love with cigar pairings, sometimes you want the flavors of the whiskey to kind of run parallel with the cigar. So I mentioned that I get a lot of spice on this, just like the cigar, things like that. But at the same time, it's also cool when there are some different flavors as well, so that they can kind of contrast each other and complement each other. And so as this kind of sweetens up a little bit, as it gets some air exposure and oxidation, that's going beautifully as the cigar smokes through. So really lovely.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what Balvenie calls the 5 rare crafts?
Absolutely, yeah. So as I said, we're extremely handcrafted, but as I also said, that word is sometimes misused and overused. I recently actually saw a McDonald's billboard with the word handcrafted on it. So clearly not everyone is on the same page about what handcrafted means. So for us, when we talk about the 5 rare crafts, that's kind of our way of saying, it's kind of the evidence to back it up, really. It's just to show these are really the things we're doing by hand. And so when I first got this job, actually, I was a bartender in New York. And I actually was very happy bartending. Sometimes you'll meet brand ambassadors who, in the whiskey world and the liquor world, who kind of had like one foot out the door of bartending and just wanted to maybe have less grueling shifts and all that. So they'll kind of take whatever brand they can get, whatever thing they can get. For me, it was a really brand-driven decision. I was very happy bartending, but the Balvenie was my absolute favorite. Just consistently kept standing out to me, not just flavor-wise, but also the more I learned about it, the more education I got in the spirits world, the more I realized how unique it was. And so when I heard that Gemma Patterson, who some of you might know, who's now our global ambassador, when I heard she, who was in my role, had been promoted, I kind of swooped in to grab this whiskey role. But one thing I will say when I began was I was a little bit nervous because I, as I said, was so charmed and so in love with how handmade it is. But you never know. It's kind of the nerve-wracking side of getting the quote-unquote dream job, is that what happens when I peek behind the curtain, when I really see how this is happening? Is it all just marketing and pretty photos? And, and so I had a little bit of trepidation when I began, that pretty picture in my head would get kind of shattered. And it absolutely hasn't, which is just so astounding. It's just incredible how truthful this handcrafted side is. So the 5 rare crafts that we refer to are the things that we still do by hand. So the first is that we grow our own barley on site, which is one, just beautiful and picturesque if you ever get to visit. It's just so lovely, these barley fields. But also it's amazing to have that literally from barley to bottle on site. We get to see every single step of this process and have our hands in every single step. So we grow our own barley. Then we actually have our own malting floor on site, which is where we hand turn the malts with our amazing malt men. So that's something that's usually done in enormous machines nowadays with these giant mechanisms that turn the barley. And we actually still do that by hand. In fact, last time I was actually in our maltings, one of the malt men ran up to me, Craig, he's one of my favorites, Craig, And he ran up and said, oh, I have to show you, we got this new thing. I'm so excited. So I'm thinking, oh, did we finally get a computer or something like that? And he showed me, and the big technological advance in the malt barn was that we had moved from a chalkboard to a whiteboard. So that was the big technology move. So we're still very old school there. We also, as I said, we make our copper pot stills by hand, hand hammered, hand hewn, which is super important because they last so much longer because the copper stays thick. Machine-made copper pot stills are actually done by turning the copper on these insanely advanced, actually very impressive, crazy machines that spin the copper so fast that actually forms a kind of a circular shape and spreads out. But the issue with that, when you use these machines, is it thins out around the edges and tends to spring leaks and doesn't last as long. So we really take the time to actually hand make the copper pot stills. The fourth rare craft, one of the coolest to see if you get to visit, is that we have our own cooperage on site, as I said, which is where you build and repair barrels. So it's an impressive thing to see these barrels being made. I've helped out. I've worked a couple shifts in the cooperage, and let me tell you, that is a workout. You will feel that for days after these shifts. And so to be able to have the cooperage that's dedicated just to us, rather than these, there are some incredible cooperages in Scotland, like Speyside Cooperage and things like that, that do wonderful work. But the thing is, they have to service dozens, if not hundreds, of distilleries sometimes. So to have our own cooperage that we know our cooperage looks at every single barrel that Balvenie enters is really, really important to us. And the last one of the kind of rare crafts is less of a craft, but we kind of like to refer to it that way because he's such an institution, is our malt master, David Stewart. So if you know Balvenie or even just whiskey, you might know about David because he's a legend. He's been with us now for 59 years, which is insane. He started as a stocks clerk, and he's been overlooking things since. So he's incredible to have at the helm of this ship. And between him, who's so experienced, and also that family ownership that I mentioned, those are the kind of things that make sure we stick to these rare crafts, that we aren't being, turned into a conglomerate and modernized and all these things. The family is really looking out for that, and so is David. So he actually got his MBE, Member of the British Empire, a couple years ago for his contributions to the whiskey world in general. So he's incredible to have as the head. So those are kind of the crafts that we talk about to be able to back up those, that handcrafted claim.
So you mentioned the copper stills that they get made by hand. So how long does a copper still last?
Ours lasts for decades, and our head coppersmith, Dennis McBain, who refuses to retire, he's been with us for 60 years, close to 61 now. People just refuse to retire at Balvenie. It's hysterical. I think his head apprentice has been an apprentice for like 35 years. Yeah. So we have these incredible teams, and so Dennis and his team oversee these copper pot stills. So there will be repairs along the years for sure. But it's incredible to have your pot stills repaired by the man who made them, because Absolutely. He knows every inch of those things. He knows by heart. So it's really incredible how long those last with really minor repairs to have happen, which is great. So. Perfect.
Listening to the Balvenie story, I think there's a lot of similarities with Davidoff, because obviously Davidoff is kind of the crop to shop philosophy, where with Naomi or Balvenie, I guess it's kind of from crop to bottle philosophy, doing everything themselves. Can you explain a little bit more about the Davidoff way?
Yes, so I've just wanted to add that I have been visiting Balvenie as well, and I was, as you said, Naomi, I was very impressed by the 5 crafts and really how they control each step. You have also like the vertical quality control than we have, and I was very, very impressed. And even there, Roy, I was feeling like these similarities between Balvenie and Davidoff. You say, Naomi, I think you're in the 5th generation, right? Or 6th, 5th?
I think on to 6th. When I started, it was 5th, and now some of the younger, they're not kids, they're older, but this younger generation of family has started to contribute as well. So it's really, kind of a combination of the 5th and 6th generations right now, overseeing things.
Yeah, and then we are in the 4th generation, so also, since 1875. And there are a lot of similarities, and Roy, what you said, crop to shop for us is basically essential to guarantee the high quality standards that we have. So we control the seeds, we develop the seeds ourselves, they belong to us. from the seeds to the different varieties of tobacco we have, to the tobacco farmers that are working with us since decades. We control everything, and this is really essential, as I said, for quality, but also for consistency. And I think consistency is we're talking about both like handcrafted products, and it's always, let's say, a challenge to be consistent. But I think you can only be consistent if you have the expertise, if you follow a crop to shop or crop to bottle business model or philosophy, as we call it. And we are proud that this year we're celebrating 30 years of crop to shop. So in 91 was the first time we have been launching the Davidoff Cigars ex-Dominican Republic, and not from Cuba. We have been before. And basically, we're all proud of this crop to shop. It's a lot of, let's say, it's labor intensive. It costs more money. But at the end, whenever you enjoy a cigar, or you drink a Balvenie, you can really feel it on the palate, that also the ingredients are being taken care of, and everything has been made with love to detail and also love to the product, which is, I think, at the end, the most important factor about it.
Perfect. We had a few questions come in earlier on, so I'll throw those in now. One question was from Charles Crisp. How many cigars does Davidoff make a year?
So only Davidoff brand, we do around, depends on the limited edition, around, let's say, 8 million cigars a year. In total, the whole group, we're talking about, it depends a bit on the years, up to 35 million cigars a year. And yeah, I mean, with both factories in Honduras and Dominican Republic, so it's great. I mean, especially, I don't know if you have been reading about it, but there is a certain cigar boom, especially in the US being our biggest market. So we have been producing a lot lately. Lately means Q4 last year and Q1 this year, which shows that yeah, even in, let's say, in these hard times, if you're at home, people still enjoy a nice cigar, and I think that's really lovely to see and also admire.
Then there was a question from Lawson. Has Davidoff ever thought about creating a Davidoff cigar to go with the Paul Roger Cuvée Prestige? Yeah,
the Paul Roger. So you have to imagine the Churchill family now, being Randolph, who is leading it, but also Churchill Estate. Mm-hmm. They have, of course, many, let's say, brands they're working with that they can use the name Churchill as a champagne Paul Roger. But there haven't been a partnership, or we haven't approached them, they haven't approached us. But it's definitely something interesting to look at, in the future. I think champagne, when it's like, what can I say, when it has a nice complexity to it, is working well with the cigar. The pairing is always sometimes a little bit delicate, because sometimes the cigar might be a little bit too complex for the champagne, or vice versa, So it's champagne. I think it's not the easiest pairing, but when it's matching, it's a very lovely pairing. That's why we normally recommend our signature cigars to go with the champagne, because they're a bit milder, and then basically you have still the palate fresh to enjoy the champagne with it. Yes, but no, but definitely interesting idea. Yeah.
There's a question which we get on a regular basis in regards to the late hour and the whiskey barrels used for the tobacco aging in the late hour.
Yes, so we get this question a lot, So so basically, the Single Malt Whiskey Society was so kind enough to provide us the barrels from Speyside, but they wouldn't tell us exactly which whiskey they were in. But for us, you have to imagine you have the whiskey cask, and we got the whiskey coming with it. So we still have the whiskey, and then basically you're moistening the cask a bit, and then you put a new tobacco in there to ferment again for 5 months, so we can keep up the consistency in flavors. Yeah, but the whiskey is unfortunately not known.
No, we've been working with the Scottish Malt Whisky Society to kind of get a breakdown and get as close as possible. But yeah, to get an exact whiskey which was put in there, that's something we've not been able to achieve yet. But who knows? There's still time. Then a question for both Naomi and Sam from Terry. How can you become a brand ambassador for either Davidoff or Balvenie?
That's a
You
wonderful
coming for my
question.
job or watch
He's
out?
coming for your job, yeah, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say for Balvenie, and all the William Grant brands, we own some other great brands around the world, like Hendrix, Tullamore Dew, some Milagro Tequila. So we have a lot of brand ambassadors for all these different brands. And one thing, it is tricky because I get this question so much, and everyone has a crazy, weird, different story as to how they became an ambassador. So it's hard to kind of nail down one route, I guess. But I know for us, because it's so travel heavy, it tends to be people who, are from the industry, or maybe they were sometimes sommeliers beforehand, sometimes marketing, things like that. But you definitely have to be at a place in your life where you're prepared to leave a lot of things behind. I mean, in normal times, I'm on the road about 75% of the time, truly. So it's actually been baffling the last year to be at my own home so much. So it's definitely about, kind of who you know and finding those connections and all that, but also, being at a place in your life where you can travel that heavily and stuff.
So if there ever comes a brand ambassador position available in Balvenie, Naomi will give us the heads up, and we'll let all of you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Another question for Sam before we get back to Naomi and talk about the second whiskey. Sam, with the cigar boom, is there an upcoming gap in aged tobacco stocks globally? And are aged tobacco cigars going to become more expensive?
You mean a gap in aged tobacco, meaning that there is not a lot more available, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Exactly. So what we are proud of, we have a safety stock of around 5 years when it comes to filler tobaccos, a bit less when it comes to binder and wrapper. So having this safety stock of 5 years gives us always this opportunity to keep on, let's say, maintaining or even increasing our aged tobacco stock. And we have been very fortunate that basically there was no natural catastrophe, or anything like that happened in Cuba, that basically the crop was gone. So touch wood, we are very lucky with this. But a part of this, having the safety stock is of course helping a lot to keep up our aged tobacco inventory, let's call it like this. And we always use it for limited editions, because the aged tobacco is giving you a kind of elegance in the blend, also a kind of sophisticated taste, and also this nice balance in a cigar. So aged tobacco is it's great to work with. You need to know how they react with other tobaccos, so it's kind of an expertise, a kind of a challenge for our master blender to always come up with new blends using this aged tobacco. And back to the second question, are aged tobacco cigars going to become clearer? Meaning basically, sorry,
More expensive. Clearer.
more expensive. I wouldn't. If I talk about us, I wouldn't say so. It's more okay. If you really go, I mean, we have tobaccos worth more than $20 million on the inventory. We can easily use also, let's say, 20 years plus leaves in a cigar. Then it becomes, of course, a bit more expensive because you have all the inventory costs behind. But I wouldn't say that now if we have a tobacco leaf that is 10-year-old, mainly that will really increase in price of the cigar. I wouldn't say so. I think the cigars are more increasing by the rarity or the exclusivity, and you can't get your hands on it. And there you see that they get quite fast, quite expensive, yes.
Perfect, thank you. Naomi, the 14-year-old Caribbean cask. Tell us more.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to say too, even before I jumped into that, it's really interesting to hear kind of the perspective of cigars and the cigar boom, because we're also in the world, and in the US especially, we're in a whiskey boom as well. And it is so crazy with aged products like you guys, that's such a tricky thing to plan for. We have our 12-year, we had to start planning for that 12 years ago. How do you predict a whiskey boom 12 years from now? It's really this crazy concept. And that's one thing I will say, just in the whiskey world, we're so lucky to be family owned. Another reason for this is because we hold on to so much stock to make sure that we're always prepared for moments like these. you'll see a lot of whiskeys out there now taking age statements off and things like that because they're literally running out of whiskey and trying to keep up. So they have to blend in a lot of younger whiskey in with their old whiskey to just try to get bottles on the shelf. And so I'm really grateful that with the family, they've been, kind of prepared for this for so long that we don't have to do that, which is really great. Because I always kind of joke, when you're the sixth generation that inherited something like this, like no generation wants to be the generation that picks it up, So they really hold on to these stocks so beautifully, which is incredible. So yeah, so this 14-year-olds, 14 years ago, they thought of this, so pretty cool. So the Caribbean cask, which we'll be doing next, this is actually the first Balvenie I ever tried, so it has kind of a special place in my heart. And I speak to a lot of people who this is actually the first Scotch they ever tried, so that's really an interesting thing. So it's aged. This one still gets those 14 years in the ex-bourbon barrels. So from that, you're still going to get that kind of honeyed vanilla base that you associate with Balvenie. But then it's going to be finished for those extra couple months in Caribbean rum casks, which is going to give it that really tropical, funky side. So that's kind of this process I keep talking about finishing, where this one's finished in the European oak, the sherry casks, and now this one's finished in the Caribbean rum casks. A huge part of why David Stewart, our malt master, was granted his MBE from the Queen was because he pioneered the finishing process with the release of the Balvenie Classic. And so that was a huge, enormous thing for the whiskey industry because so many people use this practice now. And that was really David's idea and pioneering. So a huge, huge thing. And also it's cool to sip on a whiskey that, not only tastes good, but there's a lot of history there and a lot of heritage. So yeah, as I said, this one is finished in Caribbean rum casks, which is incredible because it adds this really tropical, savory, funky side to the really smooth, rich single malts. It's a fascinating whiskey. And this one is doing astonishingly well in the US, especially. I know I'm close to the US market. It's doing well, obviously, around the whole world as well. But it's really almost out of hand how quickly this whiskey is growing. Speaking of whiskey booms, we're trying to keep up with demands for Caribbean cask. And I think the reason behind that is it has still that kind of sweet, almost like pineapple finish, really tropical, that can help draw in people who might be new to single malt whiskeys, who maybe were bourbon drinkers or Irish whiskey drinkers who are used to something smoother and sweeter. So this can kind of be a way for them to kind of dip their toe into the world of single malt scotches. But at the same time, on the flip side, because the rum that we use to season these casks is so complex and so interesting and so savory, as I said, it also adds this incredible nuance to the whiskey, this crazy layered complexity that also attracts whiskey experts who've been drinking single malt scotches for decades. So I think that's why it's doing so well. It really hits like every corner of the market, from people who are just trying scotch to people who've been drinking for generations and want to try something new. So a really, really cool whiskey there. So yeah, this one, as I said, I get really tropical, crazy, almost like grilled pineapple, like barbecued pineapple, to go with the beautiful honeyed Speyside single malt. So what a fascinating combination. And it still has a lot of that spice that goes so well with the cigar, that kind of like baking spice, black pepper, ginger, cardamom, really beautiful flavors there to go with a kind of full-bodied cigar. And I'm just going to jump in. I can see the chat going with the rum. I get this is my question I get every single time about where does the rum come from? Where does it go? Where is it now? So the rum we actually blend ourselves, which is insanely cool. So I found out when I took this role, as I said, this was the first Balvenie I ever tried. It's still to this day, probably you could blindfold me, spin me around and throw me somewhere and I could still blind taste Caribbean cask just from the number of times I've enjoyed this whiskey even before I had this role. And I was surprised when I found this job to learn something so new about it, which was that this is about the fourth or fifth rum finished Balvenie we've released. We did a golden cask, a Jamaican cask, a Cuban cask that did not make it to the US, but valiant effort. So all these different rum finishes. And so that kind of shocked me. And I was like, what about this one? What about this whiskey stuck? Why did we choose this Caribbean cask variation to stick with the core range and keep around after all these other trials of rum finished whiskeys? And what I learned was, if anyone here is familiar with the rum world, I used to work at a rum bar called Blacktail. So it's probably the category I'm most familiar with after whiskey. And the rum world is extremely entertaining, crazy vast, crazy interesting. And a huge part of that is there aren't a lot of rules in the rum world. There's not the Scotch Whisky Association breathing down your back to make sure, everything is traditional, everything's the same. So it's still a bit wet and wild, which is part of what makes rum such an entertaining category of spirits to enjoy and learn about. But at the same time, as I was speaking earlier about our core range, you want consistency. If you get another bottle of this, it should taste the same. That's, the point of the core range. And when we are getting these rum casks from these distilleries, it was extremely difficult to maintain consistency because it would kind of be all over the place. And so with the Caribbean cask that you're sipping on now, we decided to actually go to the Caribbean and blend our own rum, bring it in vats to Scotland, and then age it on site in these barrels that we made in our cooperage. So, I mean, talk about hands-on. It's just ridiculous how much time and money they're willing to spend on making sure it's done right. So for the rum itself, I can't say exactly where we get it. I swear it's not a sketchy reason. It's for, as you guys were kind of saying with trying to figure out which whiskeys are in the barrels that you get to age your cigars, there are very complicated legalities to those things when you start purchasing things from other distilleries and stuff. So it's really just annoying legal technicalities that we can't really say, just like you guys with the barrels, kind of trying to hunt down exactly where those are from. So that's a boring answer, I know, but it's really just an annoying technical issue in Scotland, a little bit of a legal thing. But so we blend it together, and then we use it usually about 3 to 4 times on the seasoning of the casks. And then at that point, after 3 to 4 times, it's taken on a bit too much wood flavor and isn't doing as much to the cask. So at that point, we actually sell it back to the rum distilleries. And it's really great because then they have further aged rums. It's a pretty solid partnership, actually. So that's kind of the story behind the rum that goes into this. But I have tried it, and it's extremely, as I said, it is overproof, hefty, demerara based, really crazy, savory, funky, because it has to be able to stand up to, a single malt Scotch that's going into these barrels. So, sometimes when people hear rum finished whiskey, they go, "Oh, is it going to be really sweet?" Like, it's not Malibu that we're seasoning these casks with. This is a proper aged rum. So it's really interesting, the process behind this whiskey for sure. And it creates a really tasty and really complex whiskey. So, very cool.
As William Grant family, never thought about selling the rum themselves instead of handing it back to wherever it came from?
I don't know if it's a pretty crazy rum that we blend. And the thing is, it's not really about what the rum tastes like on its own. It's about what it does to the barrel.
To the whiskey. Yeah.
So exactly, because we just needed to treat the barrels how we want the barrels to be treated to be able to flavor the whiskey right. So even like bourbon barrels that we buy to age, a lot of these whiskeys, ex-bourbon barrels, it's not even about the best bourbon ever that went into the barrels. It's about which barrels are the best and complement the whiskey the best. So it's the rum itself, it'll wake you up, let me tell you. This is not going to be an easy, smooth sipping rum for the masses. So selling that would be really interesting. But I will say, ambassadors are usually given some samples of it. So I have I have a part of a bottle left in my place and stuff like that, which is meant to be shared with people. So when we're back to in-person events and can actually enjoy these things in person, ambassadors, and you guys have Alwyn over there. I'm sure she has some. So not to promise for Alwyn that she'll, but anyway, we all are given samples of this to share with people and let them try, because it's a really interesting side by side with the Caribbean cask to kind of see how it influences the whiskey. So.
Perfect, thank you. We had a question come through a bit earlier, and it was about it was a bit of a contentious question by Marcel about rapid aging of whiskey and tobacco. Is there a way of enhancing or quickening the aging process?
I'll let Sam speak for tobacco, but for whiskey, I know there are some crazy things that have happened, some like kind of scientific whiskeys I've seen it referred to, things like that, where they try to replicate the aging process really fast. In fact, Japanese whiskey, if you guys keep up with Japanese whiskey news, recently had a huge slew of laws go into effect regulating Japanese whiskey. A big part of that was because a couple years ago, they found out that a lot of Japanese whiskeys were putting ages on their bottles that were not the actual age of the whiskey. They were lying about the age. Some pretty huge companies too, really crazy. And their reasoning behind it, what they claimed was their rapid aging technique made it taste like it was 18 years old or something like this. So, there's something to that for sure. But also you can't deceive the consumer in that way. So there are things being experimented with for sure. But you have to be really careful because that can very quickly turn into just a way to, deceive the consumer. And to us, like you said, Sam, about Davidoff too, it's really important to us to be extremely transparent. That's why we are very honest about exactly how it's made, and we don't have to take age statements off. We can be really straightforward about these things. So while I think the rapid aging, there's some cool technology going into that. It's very impressive and really fascinating. And I think we'll learn more about it in the years to come. I also think just be wary of whiskeys that claim rapid aging. So.
And Sam, with tobacco?
No, I believe before it was Stephen who made a good point. He says perfection doesn't come overnight, and basically for us in tobacco, there's no technique basically that you can age tobacco faster. I mean, you can do something with fermentation, that you can make fermentation faster by having higher temperature, but there is the risk of actually burning the tobacco. So this you can definitely taste in the cigar. And for us, it's clear. I mean, we dedicate a lot of time to our tobacco, a lot of love to our tobacco, and this is, I think, the aging process. When you see the tobacco sleeping there, in the warehouse are humidity controlled and temperature controlled, and I think that's the beauty of it. It's also a little bit the romantic side of tobacco. You leave it age, and you try it every year. How it's basically progressing. When is the summum that we can basically use the tobacco, because you can also overage certain tobacco varieties. And for us, there is no technique that we would apply or that I know of that others are doing to basically do the aging part faster. But what I do know, of course, there's a lot of other companies who doesn't age the tobacco at all, or very, very shortly. And I think in a way, also when you look at the Winston Churchill, and I saw some of the comments that basically it's nice because the strength is not overpowering the flavors. And that's also something due to, we have a longer fermentation period for certain tobaccos used in this cigar. So basically we decrease the temperature, we leave it longer in a fermentation pile. And also this is helping, at the end, the aged tobacco, the aging process is really giving you this balancy, is adding a bit of complexity, but it's making sure that the flavors are always in front of the strength. And I think it sounds easy, but it's a challenge doing it. And there we really sacrifice a lot of time and expertise on it, because it's really important for us to be honest, transparent, and really give this taste stimulation or journey to our consumers.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the second third of the cigar?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the second third is now becoming a nice creamy. There is some I would say some leathery notes, but also a nice sweetness of the caramel. So unfortunately, I don't have the Caribbean cask with me, but I'm very familiar with the whiskey, because for me it's one of the whiskeys that pair very, very nice with a lot of cigars. And you see in the Caribbean cask, you have this, like normally say, also this tropical fruit, but also the hints of caramel. And I think now in the second third, they pair perfectly together. So also, I think in the second third, because the tobaccos have been now heated up, let's say in the cigar, it's developing nice flavors, becoming a bit more complex, and I think it's nice, a taste journey. What I really love about cigars is also the evolution you have in the different thirds. And that's why I love the idea how you did it, that you have basically 3 different whiskeys for each third, because the cigar is changing, your palate is changing, and basically with the pairing, if it's well, if they're both well harmonizing together, it's kind of a new experience to the whiskey and also to the cigar, and I think that's the most exciting part.
Can you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned the Churchill family is quite involved in the cigar process. You mentioned Randolph Churchill. So how does Randolph Churchill get involved in the creation of a new Winston Churchill blend?
Mm-hmm. So we are very glad that we are in super good terms with the Churchill family, especially with Randolph. So our chief marketing officer, he's always checking the latest designs with Randolph, to see if it's going along his thoughts of how we develop the brand. So he's very much involved in the branding As soon as we have a new blend developed, we send it over to Randolph, and he gets to taste the cigars, and there he really trusts us. You know, he's not somebody who's then, let's say, really applying that he said, oh, I have to taste the cigar first. No, he really trusts us here. And it's always a great pleasure for him then to taste a new limited edition, to taste a new cigar that's coming out under the brand of Winston Churchill. But he's very much involved in the branding. You see that he's happy with it. We sign it off with him, and therefore he's very much involved. With Randolph, we had also some nice sessions together on our Facebook channel, for example. We did a nice session in January. So we kind of use him also like kind of an ambassador for the Churchill brand, where he can tell the stories about Sir Winston Churchill and how the links to the cigars, and how really Sir Winston Churchill was like the cigar smoker in history, right? And I think it's always very proud if we do something with Winston Churchill, and it's always very excited, yeah.
It's good to know. Naomi, we had a question come in from Peter Backley, who's a bit of a whiskey buff himself. So he wants to know what the state currently is with quarter cask and STR cask. Balvenie, if will there ever be an expression coming out in those styles?
So we haven't messed around with quarter casks too much. I will say we always have experiments going at all times. It's actually one of the coolest things about being able to walk around our warehouses with David, is to see what the family is working on. Because that's kind of the great thing, is they oversee us to make sure that we have that, you know, those traditional practices really well in hand. But at the same time, the family also trusts David and trusts the company so much that they let him experiment with crazy things. And so when I'm over there, there are always ridiculous barrels aging crazy things just to see how they go. And sometimes we release barrels that are experiments. Like in the last couple of years, we did a 19-year-old Edge of Burnhead Wood, which we experimented with heather in the kiln, which is extremely cool, and to get a bit of a heather smoke flavor to the barley. And that was an experiment from, 20 years ago almost. And then at the same time, we did the Stark Barley, where we tried this roasted malt. That was an experiment. So we do always have things like that in the works. Some are released, some are not. Many are not released. Some experiments just don't work. And sometimes with Balvenie, because our single malt, our new make spirit, right off the still, is extremely full-bodied, as I said. So we have our sister whiskey, Glenfiddich, right nearby. And sometimes experiments may not work with us, where sometimes they just, these really light casks won't hold up really to Balvenie, and we'll try it with Glenfiddich, and sometimes that works. So there's crazy experiments in the works all the time, but I don't know of an upcoming soon release of either of those things. But that doesn't mean that David does not have some tucked away in some corner of the warehouse he's playing with. So you really never know with him, never know, which is, it's very fun, because even us ambassadors sometimes are surprised when we visit about what he has in all these corners. I will say I'll know more the second I can get back to the distillery. I miss it so much. Even hearing you talk about it, Sam, every time I talk about the distillery, I almost get emotional because I just miss it. But in our normal lives, we go over there really frequently, multiple times a year to Scotland. Not only is it, of course, just fun for us to go to Scotland and visit, but it's also important for ambassadors because they want us to be extremely up to date with everything that's going on, trying all these experiments ourselves right from the cask to see how they are, working all this. I've told you about my cooperage shifts. They put us to work over there to make sure that we can speak about the whiskey from experience. We've actually, worked on all of these stages of the whiskey making process. So when I can get back over there, I'll know more about what experiments are in the works. So hopefully soon, fingers crossed.
And within your regular line, you also have a line called The Stories, which is something Sam is enjoying today. Can you tell us a little bit more about that line, or what the thought process was behind it?
Oh my gosh, I love talking about our stories range, and that's great that, he's sipping on a week of peats. That 14 years, our one peated expression on the market that's from our stories range. So essentially the 19 and the 26, the two I just mentioned, that were really these kind of crazy experiments from a while ago, are part of that stories range as well. So the idea behind it was just between being family owned and also being such a tiny operation, which I know it seems crazy because, there are over 1 million barrels on site. So it actually seems like a huge operation. But when you can compare us to, McAllen, that's 20 minutes away, we're like this tiny little thing tucked away in the hills. So between all those things being really handmade, being family owned, essentially just crazy stories pop up over the years, really incredible stories that go into this whiskey. So the stories range was about each one has an individual story behind what exactly made that whiskey. So it's a really cool way to not only release some kind of experimental rare whiskeys that are really cool for people to try, but also to really showcase the craftspeople that participated in these whiskeys. So each one has these beautiful canisters. We actually worked with this Prince artist, Andy Lovell, who does storybook covers to work on the canisters for the bottle. So they actually kind of look like a storybook. And on the back, they have the actual written out stories behind the whiskeys. And we make sure to list by name the craftspeople that were involved. We even actually, you can look up on Spotify, Balvenie, we have a series of podcasts, one dedicated to each of the stories range, where Gemma, our global ambassador, actually interviews the craftspeople at the distillery. So you can actually hear the people who made this whiskey, 20, 30 years ago, what their thoughts were on that day about exactly what happened. And these are some old school Scotsmen too. So it turns into these rambling, crazy stories about, the distillery back in the day. And so I highly recommend to listen to those podcasts, actually, especially if you, like me, are missing some travel. It's kind of a nice little escapism moment. And you can actually hear the distillery in the background and hear from the people themselves exactly what into making this whiskey. So the stories range, I highly recommend. They're really beautiful and a really, really interesting range of whiskeys.
Thanks. I think Stephen Rankin had a question about your head cooper. Did you make 250,000 casks by hand?
Ian McDonald. So he's been with us now. I think he technically retired a couple years ago. It was super funny. He retired. I went to his retirement party. Literally went to his retirement party, and the next day he was at the distillery. That's like Ian.
He just wanted to party, basically.
Yeah, it's just so funny. So he still kind of helps out. This is what I mean. People refuse to leave. He had a full-blown retirement party, and I still see him every time I go there at the distillery. So it's so funny. So Ian McDonald is infamous. I love that someone knows him. He's an incredible head cooper. And he has touched, it could be up to that number of casks. I mean, it's absolutely insane. We have 14 full-time coopers on site. It's a huge team. And then in addition to that, we have 4 apprentices at all time as well. It's one of the most sought after apprenticeships in Scotland are these cooperage apprenticeships. So there's a huge team in there working on these casks. So for the exact number that Ian himself has touched, I'm sure it's upwards of that. I mean, something insane in 50 years. I honestly can't even imagine. The speed and efficiency that these coopers have when you're watching them with these barrels, which these barrels too, they toss them around with one hand, like they weigh as much as a water bottle. And like I could fit in one. They're so huge and massive. So it's really a very impressive operation. So Ian, I'm sure, has touched probably at least that many casks in his time.
Great. You want to talk us through the 17-year-old double wood?
Absolutely. That's actually a great kind of segue with the master-apprentice relationship of the cooperage, because that's really how all things at the Balvenie are taught. At the distillery especially, there's not a sit-down PowerPoint of how to do this. It's really hands-on and person-to-person training. And so David, our malt master, as I said, he's been with us now for 59 years. So he has an apprentice I love to speak about as well, Kelsey McKechnie, who's now, I think, she's been an apprentice, quote unquote, now for almost a decade, but will one day be taking over for David. But it's amazing that she has such an intense crossover process, because by the time that she takes over operations, she'll have been working with David for goodness knows how long. So it's really wonderful to have the two of them working together. But David and his legacy as our malt master is really what went into the 17 years. So this one was released as the 50th anniversary expression. When he hit that mark with the company, they asked him to choose a new bottling to release in kind of celebration of his 5 decades at that point, now close to 6. So this was a special bottling. And I always say, if the most experienced malt master in Scotch history, which is literally what he is, which is incredible, chose to release this for 50 years in, that's a pretty high praise of this bottling. So this one, you'll see too, the kind of darker, almost purple label there was meant, as I'm sure many of you know, purple is meant for regality and celebration and all of that. So it's meant to celebrate that with David and this milestone. For the whiskey itself, it's absolutely delicious. And people ask me all the time what my favorite Balvenie is, which is it's like choosing your favorite child. It's like the hardest question ever. But I will say, usually my answer is something along the lines of, it depends on the situation. What am I eating? What am I You know, am I at a party or am I mellowing out at the end of the night? All of that. And for the 17, I always say this is my absolute favorite with a cigar. So I love that we're including this. It has, as I've said, a lot of those characteristics that the other two had as well, like that honeyed base and things like that. But this is also extremely, extremely spice forward. I know all of these have a touch of spice, but this one is crazy intense. I frequently use the word feisty to describe this whiskey, which I think is probably not a, you know, a brand approved tasting word, but to me, it's just what this is. It's very lively, very full bodied, but bright at the same time. So it really not only holds up to, I tend to like pretty full bodied cigars, so it holds up to that, but also the crazy kind of almost Cuban cigar-esque spice that is in this bottle just goes beautifully with something like this. So it's really a treat to try. So this one gets the same 17 full years in those ex-bourbons. So similar to the rest, where it's going to have that honeyed base of the Balvenie. And then it also gets finished like this 12-year in European oak sherry casks. But you'll see the difference. If you saved a little bit of your 12-year, I probably should have said this when we were sipping the 12, to save a little for a side-by-side. It can be cool to see what those extra 5 years do. And to me, it just makes it just that bit more lively, vivacious, exciting, and really, really great to have with cigar, especially as the last whiskey of the evening. So I'm glad that the pairing worked out this way.
While you pour yourself a little glass, Alan had a question. If there's an upper age limit for Cooperage Apprentice, he's asking for a friend.
I know. Oh my gosh, I don't think there is. So jump on in. I mean, people. Yeah, as I've said, how long people stay at the Balvenie. I think Dennis, our head coppersmith, is close to 80. So people really do these jobs, you know, pretty far into their lives. So feel free, go for it. Yeah, head over there. Talk to Ian. He'll let you jump back there.
With Davidoff, Sam, obviously, Henke Kellner and Eladio Diaz, they've been around for a very long time with Davidoff. Do they have an apprentice?
Yeah, so basically what we did, but just back to the Coopers, you know, I saw them working. I mean, it's a very hard job, you know. I mean, respect for those crafters who are doing this. So yeah, basically, you know, what we did 2.5 years ago, we created a Master Blending Competence Center. So basically, we have 12 experts in there, which I'm leading this center. And basically, what we're trying to do is also to get, let's say, the younger ones up to speed. You know, so basically, those 12 experts, they are working every day with tobacco. They have a great palate. Of course, we have Eladio Diaz, our head master blender, who is now, I think, he's getting 68 or 69 this year. And we were basically calculating, he was enjoying his life more than 150,000 cigars, which is a lot. So he has this palate, but he's very open and transparent to basically share his knowledge, share his expertise. And that's exactly where this Master Blending Center is there for, right? There are some younger ones, there are some older ones, but at the end, it's all about sharing the love for tobacco, sharing innovations, ideas, you know, creating new seeds. How can we work with each other? I mean, you know, innovation is now a DNA. You know, it's always easily said, but it's a challenge to always transmit it. You know, in a cigar, and also transmit it story-wise to the consumer. And therefore, this Master Blending Competence Center, it's all about innovations. It's all about sharing expertise. You know, in Honduras versus Dominican Republic, you know, the different techniques being applied. And we learn from each other, you know, and I think in tobacco you learn every day. I mean, this is something that when I talk, I'm on daily calls with our factories, you know, I always learn something new. And I think it's always, I guess, this transparency of giving the knowledge and expertise to the younger ones, I think is very critical in also developing a company, you know, especially when it comes to tobacco. And developing new blends, new varieties, and so on. So yes, we do focus a lot on this, you know, by trying cigars. I know in the whiskey world, knowing me, when I was there, we had a master class with the master distiller, and then he was basically, if I'm not mistaken, smelling over 200 whiskeys a day just by nose, you know. And just telling you from a nose that, okay, this whiskey might age a bit more, or we can use it, you know. I think that's something very incredible. We do this with pellets, so there's also no, let's say, machine or any other company helping us with it, but it's all our own pellets that we trust and basically guarantee this consistency that we have in our cigars year after year, wherever in the world you are, to enjoy one. So.
Can you tell us a little bit about the final third of the cigar?
Yeah, I think in the last third, for me, these leather notes are being still present. I feel also a little bit of nuts coming in. I had nuts bit in the first third, but also now in the last third. It's not becoming bitter, which for me is always great. You know, it stays balanced, which I think is very important for the last third, because the last third is the third that you mainly remember of the cigar. And yes, I think it stays balanced. It gets might be a bit more intense, which is normal versus the end. And yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have the 17-year-old double wood to pair with, but I can imagine, as Naomi said, with the spiciness, I'm sure it's pairing very nicely with the last third of the cigar.
One question about, not maybe not a final question, but a question about the cigar, and how long did it take from kind of start to finish to create this limited edition?
So that's a good question, and so basically, for us to develop a new project, be it a new limited edition or be it a new line, we have an innovation cycle of around 18 months. So when first the idea is born, we then develop a concept in global marketing. I then translate this concept into the cigar. And sometimes, in terms of blending, we have an internal tasting panel in Basel that I'm leading. I mean, sometimes it goes fast, sometimes it takes a bit longer. For example, the Davidoff Nicaragua one that we launched in 2013, it took us more than 1 year in terms of blending, because we knew that the benchmark is high when it comes to Nicaraguan cigars, and basically we had to make sure that we really deliver. And not like a cigar that people could say, oh, you know what, it's more or less a Dominican cigar or whatever. So we spend a lot of time in blending development, but normally I would say the blend development takes around 3 to 4 months to find the right blend, and that's always, I think it's a critical step, because you have to put yourself in the shoes of the consumer to see, okay, is this cigar matching the concept, but more importantly, is it matching the palettes of our cigar loyalists that we have to our brand, but also to other ones, so this is always an important step. And there, for me, for example, one way of measuring this is, of course, the feedback is through these virtual sessions that we get through our dear retailers like C.Gars, but also through ratings, and this cigar, the limited edition 2021, got 94 points in Cigar Journal, which is based on the blind tasting panel. So I think this is also a kind of measurement that makes us all very proud to see, okay, this blend has been accepted. Why? And again, there comes my what I said before, because mainly the flavors are in front, are on the stage rather than the strength, and it's just beautiful to enjoy, and I think that's what people are looking for, like a nice cigar that you can enjoy, that you can pair with a nice whiskey, and based on the occasion, and hopefully makes the occasion memorable. I think that's also very important.
Can you tell a little bit more about the Cigar Journal blind tastings? Because I know you sometimes are part of a blind tasting panel for Cigar Journal. So how does it go and it work? Where do they look at in specifics? So
mainly the Cigar Journal is sending out let's call it packages of 5 cigars. Basically, they're all with numbers on it, but we don't know at all what you are basically testing. So it's all blind tasting, which for me is always, let's say, the most valid tasting that you can do, because as soon as you put a ring on it, or with whiskey, as soon as you put a label on it, you already have a certain influence in your head, which is totally normal. So the blind tasting is for me always like the most challenging tasting that you can do. But yeah, then you have basically a paper where you fill out everything about the cigar, from the look and feel, the appearance, the quality, the draw, the taste, a lot of different criteria. And then basically Cigar Journal is basically writing down all the comments, looking at the ratings that you give. So it's always 100 is the maximum, and I guess 84 is the minimum. And then basically they then draw the conclusion out of it. And there, I think, I don't know how many there are in the panel, but there are many in the panel, which is always like a great measurement. You know how and they're all, some of them are retailers, but a lot of them are consumers. So this is really helping a lot. You know, also, how can I say, also for my own palate, you know, I'm tasting so many different cigars, be it from Cuba, be it from Nicaragua or Honduras or Dominican Republic, you know. And it also helps me when at the end I give a rating of, I don't know, a 94, and I see, okay, which brand it was or where the tobacco is coming from. And this also helped me to develop my own palate, you know, and we also do this in the Master Blending Competence Center, that we do enjoy different competitor cigars, you know, to see where the competitors going, you know, just to stay up to speed, you know, and I think that's very important.
Well, you've seen the question.
Yes, I saw the question. If I ever failed to recognize a Davidoff in a blind tasting, yes, I did. I'm honest. As I said, blind tasting it's very difficult. Yeah, so there have been. I think it was the 702 in the 2000 format, which I wasn't sure of. Yeah, but it's tricky, you know, and we did these blind tastings when I was traveling. 2 years ago, we did blind tastings with a lot of consumer all across the globe, from be it in China to Dubai. We did it in UK, Roy, if you remember. Yeah. And it's very
Bulgari, yeah.
Yeah, it's very, it's all about your senses, you know, and I always recommend, if you want to develop your palate, sit down, get your friend or your wife or your girlfriend or whoever, take off the rings, make a mark somewhere which cigar is which, and then just try it by yourself, you know, and you will be impressed or amazed by how the senses can sometimes fail you, or that you have something different in mind than it is, but it's very exciting. And I think you can develop your palate by focusing or listening really to the cigar, and then also go back and see, okay, I really love this cigar. What are the type of tobaccos in there? Which out of tobaccos or which varieties of tobaccos you really enjoy? And then from there on, you can develop yourself. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think the session we did at the Bulgari Hotel, I think we tasted 3 cigars. 2 were Davidoffs and 1 was a Cuban. I think the Cuban was Epicure number 2, but with a very dark wrapper.
Patagas D number 4 and the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had a variety of people there, from masters of Habanos to just cigar enthusiasts, and nobody really picked out the Cuban. So, and if they did pick it out, they didn't know what it was. So, no, it's very difficult to do, and especially if you're master of Habanos, you kind of go through quite a rigorous process, and still then it's very difficult to pick that up. Yes. Nomi, talking about Balvenie. You know, we talk a bit about Cigar Journal. That's kind of one of the leading magazines for cigars in the world, especially in Europe. Is there anything kind of a leading magazine for whiskey where Balvenie really looks at as kind of get their approval as such?
There are an amazing amount of publications for cigars, and even too just online now, an incredible amount of blogs and websites, and you know, even I had someone show me the other day on Instagram, this amazing Instagram, Single Malt Savvy has started a Balvenie portal, he calls it, and he has a breakdown of every single Balvenie on this website. Like, people are doing incredible things across the world to showcase whiskey, which is amazing. Whiskey Advocate is a great one. You know, Imbibe magazine's another great one. But there's honestly so many. But competition-wise, with blind tasting, one of the spirits competitions we take extremely seriously is the International Wine and Spirits Competition, which is over in London. And that one is for that exact reason, that it's blind, because there are so many whiskey competitions in the world. But unless it's a blind tasting, it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to take the results too seriously, because no one can, as skilled as you are, it's impossible to provide bias. And so if you know what everything is, you get in your own head. As you said, even for experts, blind tasting is so tricky to try and nail down what each thing is. And so on the flip side, though, for competitions and such, and kind of panels, to us, blind tastings are the ones that we take really seriously for people's opinions, to find out what they really think about Balvenie and these huge panels and such. So we definitely look at the International Wine and Spirits Competition. Their judgings, but also their write-ups and things tend to be extremely unbiased and just really genuine and really deep. So I always recommend looking into what they recommend.
Pete had another question for you, and then there's also a question for Sam after that. What's your favorite Balvenie? And if not Balvenie, what's your favorite whiskey in general? If you had to choose outside of Balvenie.
Yeah, it is. It's so hard. I said this earlier. It's really hard to choose a favorite, and it really does depend on kind of the situation I'm in and all of that. At this moment, for example, as it's starting to get warmer over here in New York, it's really, really nice. I love our single barrel 12-year, which is aged for 12 full years in first fill bourbon. I call it my liquid sunshine whiskey. It's really this golden hued, really light kind of floral version of Balvenie. So that's one I've pulled a couple times recently. But as I said, the 17-year double wood is my absolute favorite when I'm smoking a cigar. The Caribbean cask, I love to enjoy out in groups of large people. It's a really fun kind of hosting whiskey because, as I said, everyone enjoys it, from newbies to connoisseurs and everything in between. So it really is so hard to choose. Definitely a favorite for every situation for sure. And it's also one thing I love about how many variations and different marks of Balvenie that we have, because kind of no matter what mood I'm in or what situation, there's one that's gonna hit perfectly. So.
Thank you. And Sam, what's your favorite Davidoff cigar?
Yeah, for me it depends a lot on the occasion, I have to say. Well, it's difficult. I'm a big fan of the late hour Churchill format. I just love the format. I'm also a big lover of the Lancero format, and then we go back to the nice Cgars exclusive edition that we did, which I very much love in the Lancero. And also, I think there was a question about the London 40th anniversary, which was a Panatella cigar in a 38x6. Yeah, and this was also very elegant. So I kind of love these elegant shapes. It's more like a connoisseur shape. I just love it how the way the cigar progresses. Medicine 515. Also a very nice cigar that was kind of limited, which I loved a lot. But yeah, it depends on. I mean, in the morning, I prefer sometimes a milder cigar. You know, after dinner, a bit more complex cigar. So it really depends. But I think not because I'm working for Davidoff, but I think if you look at our assortment, I guess there, at least for me, there is a cigar for each palate, and I think that's something very remarkable. It's also yeah, no, Mitchell, you have to close the ears. But the Escurio for me, you know, if you if your palate is kind of used, you know, a bit of dirty after food, or you know, after you eat a raclette or fondue, I think then an Escurio afterwards is just like brilliant, you know. And so yeah, it depends a lot of the occasion, I have to say. But I also do enjoy Cuban cigars. Of course, I'm honest, you know, a nicely aged Cuban cigar is also something very interesting, very nice to enjoy, and yeah.
I saw someone in the chat mention too. Oh, sorry, I saw someone mention the 21 Portwood. The 21 Portwood was someone's favorite. I saw in the chat, and that's another of ours that it's finished in port pipes. It's really, really rich and decadent, almost dessert-like. And that one for me is one of my favorites for kind of, as you said, Sam, like towards the end of the evening, having a really kind of full-bodied, complex cigar. I love that 21 Portwood for like the winding down end of night, really decadent whiskey. So that's another one, kind of depending on the occasion. But yeah, another. I'm glad that's someone's favorite on here. That's a favorite for sure.
I think if we talk about UK editions, I think, yeah, as Sam mentioned, we had the Fortune Selection Lancero. I don't think there's any left, or not many left, I think.
I think there's only very few cigars left.
Yeah. So if people haven't tried that, then you're in for a treat. Then last year we had the Davidoff London 40th anniversary, Panatella, as Sam mentioned, and then this year will be the Autumn Selection Liverpool edition, which is a couple of months away. So that's another exciting one to look out for. Another question for Sam. Sam, would Davidoff ever blend a cigar and decide it would suit a different branding such as Avo?
Yeah, I saw the question. Is a good question. You know, you have to, how can I say? You have to imagine we have different brands being produced in Dominican Republic. So what we try is always to keep a line in the kind of brand we are working for, meaning that we have, so basically we have 15 different zones. So each zone is giving you different tobaccos there. So there are some zones that are more reserved for Arvo, the other ones more for Sino Platinum using also tobacco from Peru. And basically we try to differentiate always the blending. When it comes to Davidoff, it's always obviously, let's say, the higher quality of tobaccos, obviously because of the price tag also going to it. But also, I mean, also for Arvo, we try, I mean, Arvo as the person, for you who met him, he was the bon vivant, you know, and he was very close also in terms of blending and very much involved in it. And he had also a certain taste, you know, and I think a certain taste of the brand is important that you keep it, you know. And always thinking of the brand, what is the brand, what does it stand for, you know, like Arvo is more about the savor every note, this lifestyle, this bon vivant, so the cigar has to be tasty. What we learned, not too strong, because the Arvo cigar loves like a little milder flavor. So there is different ways of them. But always making sure that basically you have a kind of separation in terms of blending, which is not always easy, but we try to really separate this, yeah. And what we also have in place since 2001 is a whole list of blends that we have developed since, you know, so it's always great for us to have a database going back, okay, we created this cigar, which tobacco we use, you know, to make sure that basically we're not overstepping the brands, yeah.
Then a question, so Naomi just had to get the door to the delivery. Terry asked, can you recommend a reasonably priced cigar that has not been mentioned yet?
Reasonable priced cigars. So there I'm thinking about Sino Nicaragua. Yeah, Sino Nicaragua is something that we're going to launch, or we have launched now recently, which is reasonable priced. But I would say to Terry to recommend. I mean, you can start with a nice Arvo cigar, you know, make your way into maybe if you want to have a special treat, you go for a Davidoff. But there are a lot of cigars we have in the assortment, which is also priced reasonable, and certainly something to try. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Roy. What would you recommend? You're closer. You know,
yeah, if you look at price, obviously in the UK, we was kind of it's a tricky part with taxation on tobacco. But yeah, if you want a shorter smoke, you know, we did a session early in the year on primeros, which are small size in a variety of different flavors. So we do Escudo, Nicaragua, Dominican Maduro, and Nicaragua Maduro. They're lovely short smokes, and they have a good price point. If you want proper long fillet Davidoff, then look at something like the Andreato, or something of the smaller Concru lines. That will work as well. Arvo, as Sam mentioned, if you go to the Cgars Limited website, there's some great shorter Arvos available as well, which are a good price point. Or Camacho Machitos. Any plans to get us back to the puffer rooms to do another event with dinner? Well, that kind of lays in the hands of the government. You know, puffer rooms needs to open, and then before we can do live events there, I'm sure that will.
Yeah, in regards to the puffer rooms, we're taking bookings from the 1st of June, but it'll be limited numbers in regards to operations initially. So if you do want to come and join us at the puffer rooms, we should be open from the 1st of June, and make reservations, and looking forward to welcoming everybody, and hopefully we can do some live events and tie them in with some of these virtual events as well, so people can see what we do up here in Liverpool.
I think Nick had another great recommendation on a cheaper Davidoff, which is the tints, like the Bellicoso. That's a great price point. So that's a great suggestion.
Roy, just a quick question. An update on the second batch of limited edition cigars that we're smoking this evening. When will they be available?
Next week.
next week.
Early next week, yeah. They should be sent out tomorrow, and they should arrive Monday.
So Monday, Tuesday, we'll have these cigars that we smoked this evening in the sampler listed online and available. So, but as Sam alluded to, they're already sold out in Europe, so they won't last long. We've got 40 boxes, I believe, in total. So get in quick.
Just enough.
I've already had messages in the last couple of days. They said, "Why don't I have my cigars yet?" And Cigars Limited has their cigars. So. So, Mitchell, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, 40 boxes is just about enough for me to smoke. And Sam was saying about somebody who smoked 150,000 cigars in his lifetime. It's a lightweight. I smoked that last week. And also, just to mention, if you're looking for a better value smoke, or sorry, a good value smoke, it's got to be Avo all the way. I mean, I'm biased because we represent the brand in the UK, but I just think they're unbeatable on quality and price. For a premium long filler cigar, unbeatable.
Yep.
And very successful. I mean, it's quite a huge brand for us now.
Absolutely.
So the customers made their choice and confirmed that they are
absolutely
value.
Another question for you, Sam.
I'm just putting the link to all of our Avo cigars into the chat box.
Perfect.
Never mind the link, Paul. You're supposed to be rationalising and rejigging the bloody range this year and adding to the range.
We're working on that one.
What's the best-selling Winston Churchill cigar for you, Sam?
So basically, the Winston Churchill, the best-selling line already is the late hour line, and there it is close between Robusta and Toro. There's not big difference. And I think there was also a question, the overall best-selling cigar is the Davidoff 2000. So this is by far number one, which, you know, for me, it's always, I mean, it's not a big surprise because cigar has been in the market since over 30 years, but still it's a Corona format, you know, and today you see more and more Toro formats coming out, Robustos, you know, so I think it's nice that still a Corona format is number one selling cigars in our whole portfolio.
Alan had a question. Is there a recommendation on how long to age a Davidoff limited edition in the humidifier to really notice a difference?
This is hard to tell. I mean, Mitchell, you're also an expert in aging cigars. I mean, it depends a bit. So basically, the tobaccos we use in limited editions, they're very, let's say, already carefully aged, but nevertheless, you know, there's always like this question, okay, when a cigar is launched, is it maybe a bit too young, or can you age it longer in the humidor? You can definitely age it longer in humidor. Now, to give you a specific year or how many years, it's hard to say. You know, it's also the way you store the cigars. But I would say, I mean, I have been enjoying cigars that I have since 2004. In my humidor, they're still great to enjoy. You know, they get a little bit more subtle, a little bit more elegant. But I think the beauty of it is what I always recommend is buy a box or buy two boxes. You know, you have one box that you try a cigar each 3 months, you know, to see how it develops. And then basically when you know, oh wow, okay, after 1 or 2 years, now it's perfect, you still have another box that you can enjoy, you know. It's basically also a little bit of trying how the cigar is aging. What we always say is, of course, the more, let's say, thicker, the more oily the tobacco is, the better you can age it. It's like with the wine, you know, the Pinot Noir ages differently than a nice Bordeaux. And so, but it's all about our own experience. And I think it's a nice experience. You go back to the humidor, you say, I haven't enjoyed this one since a long time. You try it again and you see a bit how it's developing. And yeah, I mean, there is no real age to it, but definitely if you store your cigars correctly, they can age for a very long time.
See, Naomi is back. So Naomi we had a question earlier about a cigar at a lower price point, and he also asked, is there a whiskey you would recommend at maybe a bit of a lower price point?
Absolutely. Yeah, for within the Balvenie range, probably the 12 Doublewood, and then of our Stories range, another kind of lower price point is another 12-year that we released for that, which is called our Sweet Toast of American Oak, which is a really cool one. And it's actually, if there are anyone on here who likes bourbon, it's a really kind of lovely scotch for bourbon drinkers. It's finished in new oak barrels that are toasted rather than charred. And so when you char a barrel, it's very high heat for a very short amount of time. So you get this kind of almost like black crocodile skin looking char on the inside, versus toasting is much lower heat for much longer. And it creates this extremely, extremely kind of light and sweet Balvenie, where the Balvenie actually soaks even deeper into the barrel because of this toasting process. So you get a lot more wood influence on that. So for within the Balvenie range, those are two that are a little bit more affordable. But I will say, just in general, Monkey Shoulder, if anyone on here has heard of that. So Monkey Shoulder is technically a blended whiskey that we released, technically because it's different single malts blended together. But it's a mix of Balvenie, Glenfiddich, and Canninvie, which are three of our single malts. And that's an insanely cool whiskey to have on your shelf because it's the price of a blend. It's really low price. People love it for cocktails and things like that. It's ridiculously mixable, super smooth. But unlike many blends on the market, almost all blends, that use grain whiskey in there, which is essentially vodka. It's a really cheap, you can make it in crazy high quantities, and essentially a flavorless whiskey. And they'll throw that in with some single malt and call it a blend. So it tends to kind of lower the flavor a bit. Monkey Shoulder is a blend that only uses single malt. So it's this really incredible deal to be able to get a mixable, less expensive, really accessible single malt. So that's a highly recommend whiskey, Monkey Shoulder. And that was when I was a bartender too. That was one of my absolute favorites to use, to be able to use a single malt in a cocktail at not a crazy price point. So highly recommend Monkey Shoulder.
I guess we want to go a bit more traditional than probably Glenfiddich 12.
Yeah, absolutely. Glenfiddich is our sister whiskey. They're, about 10 feet away from us in Scotland. So really fun to visit. They're kind of our big sister, we call them. They're a bit of a larger operation, but William Grant & Sons, I mentioned, owns quite a few incredible brands like Hendricks and Tullamore Dew and all that. But the kind of heart and soul of the William Grant & Sons company are Balvenie and Glenfiddich, because those are the two that the man himself. So it's a really cool opportunity there. So yeah, Glenfiddich 12 as well, absolutely delicious.
Can we get your final thoughts on the cigar before we wrap things up?
Oh my goodness, me or Sam?
Yes, you, yeah.
Oh yeah. No, my thoughts are, it's absolutely incredible. It's been just so lovely to try 3 different whiskeys with one cigar. Isn't something I've actually really probably sat down and really thought about before. So that's been incredible to see the 3 different stages of the whiskeys, or of the cigar with 3 different whiskeys, was such a cool way to do this pairing. So really, really fascinating look at that. I definitely have not sat down with that before, and it's so smooth. It definitely has that kind of full body hint that I like, but still being ridiculously smooth. And like you said, Sam, not bitter at the end, which I think happens sometimes. It's still, I'm getting towards the end of mine, and it's still coming off extremely smooth and palatable. So it's lovely. And for a beautiful summer day here, it's like
for you, it is indeed, yes.
Yes, really lovely.
Sam, any final thoughts from your side?
No, I think especially at the end, well, also through the cigar, I always recommend to enjoy it slowly, especially versus the end. Try to keep the pace, not going too fast. But I think now it's also a bit increasing in intensity, a bit of this spicy notes to finish, but also I think leaving like a nice aftertaste on your palate, which I think it's nice, when unfortunately the cigar is coming to an end, you still have this nice aftertaste in your mouth and remembering you of the cigar. So this for me it's perfect. And I think I have 4 left in my humidor, so it's a bit of a pity, but but I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Unfortunately, I didn't have the whiskeys to pair with, but as I know Balvenie very well, it was for sure a great experience. And I saw in the chat that basically you all enjoyed the cigar, you all enjoyed the whiskey, so perfect.
Just to let you know, Cgars Limited will have the boxes on sale next week on their website. So if you only got 4 left, you can
you can buy some back, Sam.
Before we close off, Naomi, thank you very much for joining us from the States. I know we had to postpone it a few times, but your presence has been much appreciated, and your knowledge about Balvenie and the way you explain it has been great. Sam, as always, thank you from
pleasure.
Enlightening us again in the world of Davidoff. And thank you all for joining and buying the sampling pack. no, unfortunately, the delays were out of our hands, but I hope it was worth the wait for all of you and that you enjoyed the evening, the pairings with Balvenie and the Davidoff Winston late hour. And final words to Paul and Mitchell.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks to our brand ambassadors for a lovely event. And thank you to our guests for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the evening. I think we ran over time, which is really lovely, because I think it shows that everyone was enjoying themselves. And from the amount of messages in the chat box, I think it made a very, very interesting and lively debate. So, yeah, great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks to everybody.
Perfect.
Yeah, much appreciated. I've just dropped in the link for next week's Zoom call, which is the Plasencia New Sixto, which we're pairing with the Forticana. It'll be a great event. So these will be shipped out over the weekend, Monday, so you'll have them Tuesday if you wish to join us next week. Naomi, fabulous pairings. Sam, much appreciated once again. And back to Roy to close us out. Thank you, everyone.
As we said at the beginning, this session has been recorded, so we'll send the videos to Cgars Limited, and it will be on their YouTube channel in a couple of days, I assume. So thank you all for joining, and hopefully see you next week at the Plasencia event. Have a great evening.
Cheers.
Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye bye.